Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Welcome back. Actually, it's not welcome back. It's a revision, a restart of LDM,
LDM show.
the LDM show. So
When was the
this
first time we did LDM?
is close to a decade ago, bro. I
No, it
think
wasn't a decade.
8 years.
It
This is
was
800.
2014. So 7 years.
7 years.
More than 7. Well, 7 years.
Closing in on a decade, isn't it?
Wow.
It's been long, but we're back, and hopefully,
Return of the LDM.
hopefully, it'll be consistent as it used to be.
Inshallah. No, let's do it. Let's make this consistent.
So, guys, today's discussion, I'm going to keep it brief, but it's on the recent discussion that took place between Mohammad Hijab and Jordan Peterson. Brilliant discussion overall, bro. You know, and there's so many brilliant aspects of that discussion, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
But let me, what are your thoughts, bro, when you watched it?
Firstly, what I like is it wasn't just like, oh, I like your watch, I like your thing, oh, I like this, I like your hat, I like this. No, it's kind of like, okay, so we're both coming from two different perspectives, we're coming from different worldviews, different paradigms, different ideas of the world, but we're going to have this cordial discussion, we're going to push back against each other's ideas, we're going to disagree, but we're going to do it in an amicable, respectful way without, you know, without actually just agreeing for the sake of agreeing. And that happened throughout. I think one of the first things that happened, which was very interesting, is when Hijab tried to explain about God's existence, and then Peterson made a very interesting point, and that was a point of convergence with Islam in regards to, well, should we even treat God like a proposition? Why should we do that? In fact, he spoke about the idea of the divine spark, which is I guess a metaphor from our perspective of like the fitrah, right? This natural disposition. And then Peterson is humble enough to ask, okay, who's this Justin Barrett that you're referring to? And there's that very interesting convergence, in terms of Islamic theology and our perspective, and what Peterson was trying to point to, that God's not a proposition, and that was a point in which they both agreed. And I liked the way that it came out.
And then Hijab brought the concept of the fitrah into the discussion, and it was powerful to see that sort of, that a non-Muslim public intellectual, who deals with existentialism, deals with these questions,
nihilism,
exactly, and he understands that the power of the belief in God being more so innate than something that you have to go and validate and prove,
and being pragmatic, that the belief in God is something which is not only a starting point, but it's also something that gives your life practical value. You actually benefit from having this starting lens to look at the world.
Of course, because everyone has a worldview.
Yeah.
Without having a worldview or a position, you can't function.
No, absolutely. There is no perspectiveless perspective.
Yeah.
This idea of total objectivity. You know what I mean? It's like, we all start off the world with certain cultural, social pressures. We have biases and lens and stories, and we have these rackets. We have all these things going on, and the fitrah comes out, and it's one of those things that was really good that they both agreed about that point. Yeah, I mean that's I think, and I spoke to someone earlier today who's working on this. About the sort of the information that we get from anthropology in terms of the belief in God and this type of thing. And I was telling him, look, you need to speed up your research. You need to publish, because this is like really, it's a huge point. It is a huge point of interest for us.
Absolutely, yeah. And bro, the debate, it was a brilliant discussion, because like you said, they weren't always agreeing with each other, and there was points where they corrected each other, and there was points where they took on the corrections, right? So for example, the part about where Jordan Peterson had referred to the Prophet ﷺ as a warlord, right? And then Hijab confronted him about this, in a nice, humble way, respectful way. And Peterson had this, the sincerity and honesty, and that goodwill to take it on board. And this is something beautiful to see, right? You don't see most people doing that these days. They would fight, tooth and nail.
Tooth and nail. And just before we get into the other things he said about this, let's have a sort of recap of what happened there. So he was sort of resonating with this popular notion, which these people try and push out, that the Prophet ﷺ is a warlord and Islam is about military conquest. And then Hijab gave him some basics information about the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And he explained in a really nice way how he forgave the killer of his uncle and all of these things. And then it was just kind of like he realized he was wrong, and then he later on said, "Is there anything else that I need to?"
Yeah, and that was a very
amazing,
very powerful.
That's progress.
You have
right
to
there.
commend Peterson. He's much older. He's studied all of his
He's
life.
An academic.
He's
a
an
public
academic,
intellectual. Yeah,
very super sharp, intelligent guy. And someone that's credited. He's someone that's looked up to, and he has the humility to ask Hijab on the show that if there's anything else, because we've clarified one thing, if there's anything else you feel I may have misrepresented, let's bring the elephants out from under the carpet and deal with them, right? Which was very powerful, and you have to commend Peterson for that. But was there anything else that stood out to you during that discussion that you found was very interesting?
Well, there's quite a few points, and I think one of the points which was quite interesting, the way that Hijab explained it, is about the way that the ancient world was. So in the ancient world, you had states which were out there, which only really cared about their own self-interest,
Yep.
And their own self-interest was just national security concerns. So you either conquered or you were going to be conquered. It was very much like a state of anarchy. And then in this state, you can't just be a passive observer, because you're going to get eaten up. So, he explained in a very interesting way why the early Islamic conquest happened, why it was necessary to do that as a safeguarding mechanism, and why we basically have this particular narrative about the ancient world and today, and why this sort of like with today, and we have treaties and we have all of these types of things, why it's essentially anybody watching that will understand why it's unfair to take the ancient world and then the way that they operated and then superimpose that on today's world and say, oh, that was wrong, and these types of things. So it's very interesting from that perspective.
That was powerful, because look, most people these days, the conception they have in their mind is Islam just trampled over everyone and was not considerate of any other faith, any other system, any other religion.
Yes.
This is total nonsense, and Hijab exposed this in a very beautiful way, right?
He even said that we had a pluralistic understanding from the perspective they could have their own laws,
of course,
they could have their own courts.
There's many examples, bro. The Treaty of Medina, the Constitution of Medina is a brilliant example of this. And remember, this is a time where the Muslims, have control, because the leader of Medina is the Prophet ﷺ, right? Yet he puts in place a pact, and I actually studied this from my last essay. I did an essay on this. He puts in place a pact which gives the Jews of Medina their rights. They can worship as they wish. They can have their places of worship.
And the other mushriks.
And on top of it, they were given opportunities to partake in state affairs as well. So it wasn't just that you were the lower part of the community and you have no role in.
Well, they had a role in they had a what's it called, a role to play in not. From the security perspective, there's a collective security that they were there to defend each other.
So that's literally elevating and showing that, look, we're on an equal playing field here from a social perspective within our society, and Islam allowed for all of this. The conquest of Mecca, Hijab mentioned as well. Which was
bloodless victory. And you spoke about Medina. So what's interesting is the Muslims had the power, but that didn't mean that the Prophet ﷺ completely imposed Islam upon everybody and said, okay, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that. And he spoke up about the issue that Peterson obviously hates totalitarian states and this incursion of the central government on your personal life and on your affairs and all these types of things. And he explained, no, actually Islam doesn't do that. Islam gives a freedom to people of other faiths, and he even is good at. Peterson said Jordan Peterson said, people of the book. So he understood. He had some understanding of certain things. Other things he didn't have a correct understanding. But nonetheless, it was so powerful to see Hijab giving the Islamic perspective without any sugarcoating, without any,
Yeah.
I think another good point to bring up is when he was speaking about God's names and attributes, and he directly said to him, "I'm going to recite to you," and that was such a beautiful recitation.
It was.
And Peterson's there listening, and he's just reciting, and he's not hurrying up with his recitation and just like trying to speed things up. Yeah, he's just taking his time, gives a recitation, and then he's there listening.
And then Professor Peterson's response was funny as well. Like, why did you feel the need to recite it to me? Why did you recite it to me?
He didn't do it in a negative
I know,
way.
but
because he's a psychologist.
He was
he was kind of like trying to understand.
Yeah.
Because remember, it's two different worldviews.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So we have, even if we have, for example, the Londonier series. So we have Abdurrahman who'd read the poem. Yeah, and then he'd recite the poem, and then you'd start the Londonier. Muslims have a certain tradition about recitation, about this, about that. So he doesn't understand, and he didn't question to mock or to challenge. It was more like, okay, so what is the thinking behind this?
Yeah.
And hijab was
hijab, isn't it?
Unapologetic. He's just like,
we want you to hear the message of Islam.
Yeah, basically what we're saying is we want you to become Muslim.
Come on board, Professor Peterson. So, but that led to another interesting point, which is about where Dr. Peterson brought up the whole thing about the evangelical aspect of Christianity and Islam, and how there's these two communities and religions that are both wanting to spread their message. And according to him, at that point, the thinking was that there seems to be an inevitable clash.
Yeah.
Right. But then I think somewhere along the line it was clarified that Islam, there's no compulsion in Islam. We're to deliver the message, share the message with people, because everyone deserves to hear it especially if you've understood the truth of it and the importance of it. But there's no compulsion upon you. God's given you a mind, He's given you an intellect. I'm going to share the information. My job is just to clearly convey, as we say in our courses as well. It's up to the individual now to make that intelligent decision as to what they want to do.
Absolutely.
Right? And that removes the problem. Right? I think Peterson put it in the way that both share your stories, and whoever's story is the best would win. He put it like that in quite a nice way. But there's no like someone you have to become Muslim just because we've told you the message. There's nothing like this.
No. There was some other points throughout the discussion which were interesting. So when it came to say the prophecy of the Prophet ﷺ, when he was in the Battle of Khandaq and he hit the rock and he said about Rome and Persia and so on, and Hijab totally took all of that narrative and he said, this is why Islam is true. This is actually an argument for Islam. Yeah. Now, not many people say that, but that is actually unpopular to say, because people don't want to be so frank and direct, but that is the case. And to hear two public intellectuals, a Muslim public intellectual and someone from the other side, and they're openly conveying this, they're saying, look, this is what it is, and this is what we believe. That gives, I think, Muslims a lot of confidence, and it also makes non-Muslims understand Islam as a sociological phenomenon, not just the caricatures that they hear. And it also explains why Muslims are people of honor, why Muslims have this sense of pride. In their minds, some of them, of course, we're just talking about a minority of the ones on the extreme. They would be like, oh, these guys, they're backwards in science, they're backwards here, they're backwards there, and the GDP is behind and this and that. And then hijab obviously referred to the Ottomans. He didn't mention the Abbasids and Umayyads, and he couldn't mention them obviously because of time and stuff. But again, Peterson agreed that you have to look at a longer time span. You can't just look at a particular period and stuff.
Yes, it is really interesting. I was earlier reading the book by Muhammad Asad, and he made a really interesting. No, it's called The Crossroads to Islam.
Okay.
With really brilliant insights he shares in that, and he was mentioning a similar point about if you look at these other ancient civilizations, their drive to conquer was just a will to power in and of itself as an ends. They just wanted power, they wanted control, and they wanted material comfort for themselves through this. But when Islam conquered the expanse of the world, it was the fundamental driving force wasn't that. It was based on something far more profound. transcendent. It was about belief in God, worshipping God, justice being established on earth, and so on and so forth.
Not only this, obviously the discussion was very short compared to what they had to say, but there's an interesting narration of the Prophet ﷺ, which is worth mentioning here. It wasn't mentioned in the discussion, but maybe in the future. The Prophet ﷺ spoke about the Turks and the Ethiopians. So he basically said, do not fight them unless they fight you. And what's interesting is that they were not a threat. So the Ethiopians were not a threat, and the Turks were not a threat. The Romans and the Persians were a threat, and they had shown their threat not only as a verbally, but there was physical incursions into Arabia. So clearly, we have a very sophisticated foreign policy. It's not just like declare war against everyone, yeah. And there's a beautiful historical reality that in Habasha, in modern day, what we would call, east of Africa, the eastern part of Africa, the Horn of Africa, we have many Muslims. We have Afar Muslims, we have Somali Muslims, we have Ethiopian Muslims, and these Muslims are, not Muslims through conquest. The Turkic people who became Muslim, the Uyghurs, the Kazakhs, the Uzbeks, later on, they went into Europe, the Seljuks, the Ottomans. These people, again, who the Prophet ﷺ said, do not fight the Turks unless they fight you, they did not accept Islam through conquest, right? So there's beautiful things when you look at Islamic international relations. Yet the way that the far right and certain Islamophobes try and push out a narrative is as if there was just this Islamic juggernaut that just came and just started dominating and forcing everyone to convert by the sword and this type of thing. So I like the title, and I think we should end upon this point. The title was Islam and the Possibilities of Peace, right? So I read that as a positive title because usually it's about Islam and war and Islam and incompatibility with the West, but here is Islam and the possibilities of peace. And that's not only peace between if you like the West and Islamic countries, but also peace between Muslims and non-Muslims in the West, that there is no need for any of these supposed things that people are saying is going to happen. People like Douglas Murray and others who try and pander to this idea that people cannot live together and all these types of things.
It's ridiculous, bro. And a good reference point, a recent book I came across and went through, is by John Andrew Morrow. He's written a book called The Covenants of the Prophet with the Christian World, right? And he covers several covenants that the Prophet ﷺ put in place with the Christians at his time, including the Covenant of Najran and so on and so forth, all of them. And he highlights that the Prophet ﷺ, he gave people of different faiths their rights, and there was an attempt to always create a society where there's cohesion, and not dominance or war or anything like this, right? People just need to go. I mean, the best source to go to is the founder of Islam, the Prophet ﷺ himself. See how he engaged with other communities and other cultures and other people, as opposed to assuming based on whatever you're hearing on the media and other, but anyway, anything else you want to add?
No, just we need to relaunch the LDM.
This is it.
Yeah, just we need to do it once a week.
LDM show once a week. You guys need to hold him to it. So go to his channel and make sure if he posts videos and he hasn't put an LDM video within a week's time frame, then challenge him on that, inshallah. All right, guys, take care next time. Until next time, assalamu alaikum.